In the last stream, we were working on finally setting up a bunch of these big multi-block structures from immersive engineering. We have our industrial fermenter alongside our industrial squeezer. We have two of these refineries. We have the bottling plant, and we have the behemoth that is the arc furnace. All of those were set up, and almost all of those are running in the exact same way as they were at the end of the last episode, with the exception of our two refineries and our bottling plant, because we ran into a couple of issues after the end of the last stream. The first issue that we ran into is that previously we just had a fluid interface on the front of both of these refineries, and I was under the assumption that that would mean that it would just pull the liquids that we needed from these refineries as and when they were needed. But for whatever reason, the fluid interfaces also seem to input items, because the problem we ran into is that over here, our lava tank actually ran out of lava, and the system decided to pump some of our phenolic resin into this tank. And so we ended up with phenolic resin in the tank, the lava couldn't get pumped out, and everything was a bit of a disaster. I'm not quite sure why it works like that, but it seems like for whatever reason, the default fluid interface will receive items if the machine auto ejects. So I think the problem is that the refinery over here from immersive engineering does try and auto eject the liquid, so it tries to push the liquid into the fluid interface, at which point that fluid interface kind of acts like a fluid input and sends the fluid round to another fluid interface that's ready to receive fluids, and therefore when the lava tank was empty, it was seen as being ready to receive fluids by the system, and so it received the phenolic resin, and that caused a whole host of problems. And so what I've gone ahead and done is for now disconnected those fluid interfaces. I think there are two things we could do. The easy solution is just to place down a tank as an intermediary between the refineries and the integrated dynamic system, because as I said, I think it's just the fact that the refinery tries to push the liquid out that is causing the problem. And so I think if we were to craft, say, a singularity tank, this guy right here, this can hold 32 buckets and is super cheap to make. It's just iron and glass. I think we could put those down directly in front of the refineries, of course, with those fluid interfaces from last episode on these tanks. So something like this. That way the refineries are still going to push out into the tanks, but now because these tanks don't push to the interface, I don't think we should ever end up with a liquid in a different tank. One other thing we could do if we really wanted to make sure that we never ended up with the wrong liquid in the wrong tank is we could look at using these filtering fluid interfaces. These, as the name suggests, allow you to filter what liquid can go into the adjacent inventory, the adjacent tank. And so I'm going to leave it like this for now, but if we do run into the same issue again, we could potentially look at upgrading some of our fluid interfaces and making sure that every single fluid interface is set up to only receive a specific kind of liquid. For now, I think this should work fine. I did have to go ahead and remove the storage downgrade over here because we wanted to get all of the phenolic resin out of the tank, and the fastest and easiest way to do that was to just take out the downgrade and allow this to receive all the phenolic resin by making more and more and more of these Duraplast sheets. For now, I want to work on pushing forward and seeing if we can't craft some of these finished PCBs. To do that, there are a couple of things that we need. One of the first things that we need is the Amadron tablet here, because one marketplace isn't enough. The Amadron tablet is thankfully pretty easy to make. It is mostly just a bunch of plastic. We need one GPS tool. This is plastic with diamonds, a redstone torch, and a glass pane. And I think the glass pane there is probably the only thing that we're missing. I think regular glass panes will work here. Let me give that a try. Can I make the GPS tool? I can. Nice. On top of that, we also need an air canister. This is just a pressure tube with some compressed iron and redstone. We'll take that out. We'll drop all that stuff into the system, and that should be basically everything that we need for our Amadron tablet, assuming that we have plastic in the system, but I don't think that we do. That is completely fine. Let me quickly go and grab some from our very full chest over here, which is currently deleting plastic. The system keeps going here. It keeps filling the bucket up with molten plastic. It puts it in the chest, and then because there's no space, it just empties the bucket and produces no plastic, which is not ideal. So we could also look at replacing that system, or at least improving that system, so that we can potentially get more efficient plastic, or potentially not delete plastic going forward as well. For now, though, we should have everything for the Amadron tablet. This does need charging, and to do that, we need to make a charging station from Pneumaticraft. Again, fairly easy stuff. In fact, we have everything to make it. This just goes down anywhere where there is pressure. Speaking of pressure, between streams, I have also gone ahead and replaced our rotational compressors with these liquid compressors from Pneumaticraft because they are faster and speed upable, unlike the rotational compressors. And so this is now just running at a consistently higher pressure. We're almost always at 5 bar now, so everything is running just that little bit smoother, and it also means that we have more rotational energy free if we wanted to add more of those alternators that we talked about a little bit in the last episode. Either way though, for now, if we just go ahead and place this down, let's say right about here, we can go ahead and drop on our Amadron tablet, like so, and that's going to slowly but surely fill up with pressure. And I've also been told that we should be able to place our netherite jetpack into here as well to charge it up, as opposed to putting it under our rotational energy. Another benefit of this charger is that we can also go ahead and put speed upgrades into here as well. And so if I craft just a few more of those, and I am going to go for the full 10 here if we can, that should hopefully make this very fast at filling up the Amadron tablet, and I'm hopeful that it will also make it very fast at filling up this jetpack as well. We're going to have to test that later in the episode because I have just filled this jetpack up the old-fashioned way. But now, with the Amadron tablet, what this allows us to do is trade with the Amadron network. To do that, we do need to have a specified inventory. So you can place down any kind of inventory and then shift right click onto it. That's going to set this as the inventory for our purchases. And now we can begin to purchase things from the Amadron network. For example, the first quest here wants us to purchase a PCB blueprint. Almost everything in here requires emeralds, so we might as well take those out and drop those in the chest. As soon as those are in the chest, we can now use those to purchase certain items. For example, if I wanted one PCB blueprint, I can go ahead and right-click and then place order. And what that should do is that should send one of Amadron's drones out from the ether to take 8 emeralds out of our chest, and then in return, they should send another drone momentarily that will bring back the PCB blueprint. Nice. Look at that. Cool. We can also do the exact same thing with the assembly program laser here, which is going to be required before the end of this quest line. And so real quick, I feel like we might as well also get the assembly program laser, which I think is this one right next to the PCB blueprint. Again, place order. You can buy multiple. If you right click more than once, you can buy as many as you like. You can also sell and buy on the network as well. So for example, we could turn some rotten flesh here into emeralds if we wanted to. We could also turn emeralds into redstone. The trades do change every day, but some of the trades are permanent. For example, the things like the assembly program, the things like the PCB blueprint that are necessities, those are always here, but I believe all of the other stuff down here changes every day, so you can get different sales and different purchases that are available. For now though, let me go ahead and see about making the UV light box here. This is the reason that we need this PCB blueprint. This requires 3 redstone lamps, which is going to require a little bit of glowstone. We are fully out of glowstone, and for that we are going to have to head back through to the nether to get even more of it. Once we have that UV light box though, that is going to allow us to kind of complete the final step for the PCBs, because the way this works here is that we take our circuit backplane with our titanium ingots, and those combined in a pressure chamber with electrum wire can get us these empty PCBs. We're going to have to automate the production of that, but once we have these empty PCBs, there are then kind of 2 things that you can do. Once we have the assembly controllers, the system becomes much easier to work with because you no longer need the UV light box. But in order to get to this setup with the assembly controller, we have to first have finished PCBs because all of the recipes here require some kind of finished PCB. And so initially, to get our first PCBs to make the improved system, we are going to have to get both the UV light box and some etching acid. The etching acid down here improves the chance of your PCB in the UV light box. That will make sense later on in the episode, but for now it does mean that we need etching acid, and in this pack, the recipe for etching acid has been tweaked to require the mixer from Immersive Engineering, another fairly big multi-block structure. Between streams, I did go ahead and grab all of the required items for the mixer, and so it should just be a case of placing that down somewhere around here to make the etching acid bucket. I think somewhat awkwardly, I might just put this down haphazardly for now because I don't really think that we're going to need this for much else going forward. At the very least, it's not going to be needed for automation, because once we have 1 bucket of etching acid, we can then use that in the etching tank to make all of the PCBs that we're going to need until we get the assembly platform, at which point we can then do away with using the etching acid entirely. And so I don't think this needs to be a permanent fixture in our base. All right, so once we have this down, again, just using the visualization in the engineer's manual, we should be able to right click and the mixer is built. I did go ahead and also grab some glowstone dust from the nether as well. And so we should be able to quickly craft up 3 blocks of glowstone, and that should be everything for the UV light box. 1, 2, and 3 redstone lamps, and boom. Nice. I don't know if this requires pressure. It does. We got a little port on the back there. Yep, this does indeed require pressure. And so we'll also go ahead and put this down where there is pressure. Again, I'm not too worried about where we put this because this is, again, another temporary setup. We're not going to keep this here permanently. We don't need it permanently. It is a very temporary solution. Over here, we're going to, again, throw down an energy exporter right about here. And then, I guess, somewhat haphazardly, stressing that this is very temporary, we're going to go ahead and hook this up to power, like so, making sure that we have a variable card in here. And now, in terms of making our first bucket of etching acid, we just need to go ahead and place 1 rotten flesh and 250 millibuckets of plastic into the mixer. That does only get us 250 millibuckets of etching acid. I don't know if we're going to need a full bucket's worth, but I think it's going to be easier logistically just moving the etching acid around if we do have a full bucket of the stuff. And so let me go ahead and grab a full 1000 millibuckets of molten plastic out of here. I don't know if I can just right click that into the mixer. I don't think I can. I think I am going to have to pump that in. Thankfully, that should be very easy for us to do with a fluid pipe and a tank. And so let me do this, let's do this, let's do this, and let's do this. That should fill this up. It does. And then from there, we just need a little bit of rotten flesh. Now, the quest here does have a reward of 8 rotten flesh. The only thing we're missing for this flesh is nitrate dust. The reason for that is that you can make rotten flesh in this pack using leather and nitrate dust in water. Thankfully, the nitrate dust is super easy. It's just sandstone through crushing wheels. You got a 12% chance there to get nitrate dust. Right now, we have got 512 sand, thanks to the fact that we have it automated downstairs. And so if we quickly grab a stack of sandstone, we should then be able to just run that through really any of our crushing wheels. I'm going to use these ones right here because they're currently not doing anything. And that should have a fairly decent chance of getting us some nitrate. We did. Nice. We got 8 and a lot of sand. Cool, you can just right click, by the way, on the chute to take the items out of there so they don't clog up the system. And so just as a reward there, we get enough rotten flesh, and so we can go ahead and just put that into here. Again, we want 4 in there, and that should begin to convert into etching acid. Cool. So again, I believe we do need a tank to receive that out the front. Fantastic. Then we can pick that up. That's going to complete the quest. And now we just need an etching tank, and we should be good to start making the unassembled PCBs. So as far as the etching tank is concerned, this requires a regular tank with some obsidian, another glass pane, some reinforced walls, and some reinforced brick slabs. Do we have any of the stuff to make that is a good question. We can make the reinforced slabs, that's fine. I don't believe we've made any reinforced brick walls. For that, we are going to need some more reinforced brick. Do we have any stone in the system? We do not. Thankfully, we do have our time in a bottle, so getting more stone from the furnace here, not going to take too long at all. Obsidian, I think we also might not have, but never mind, we totally do, because we can, of course, buy it from the store there. And as soon as we have 8 stone, we can craft that with 1 compressed iron ingot. That gets us some reinforced stone, which should be more than enough to make the reinforced brick walls just as soon as we craft up some reinforced bricks, and then craft those reinforced bricks into reinforced brick walls. Nice. And with that, we're just missing a small fluid tank. The small fluid tank needs a regular tank. The regular tank needs space to actually be crafted. And from there, we have everything for the fluid tank and everything for the etching tank. This does not require any kind of pressure, so we can just place this down. And the way this works is we go ahead and place our etching acid in, and then we place into this very large left slot any of the empty PCBs that we have. And as shown here in JEI, that's going to take those empty PCBs and turn them into either unassembled PCBs or failed PCBs. First though, we do of course have to get some of those empty PCBs, and so let's go ahead and see if we can't make some of these. For now, we are going to be able to make some of these manually. If we were to grab some of our backplanes out of here, we've got 8 currently, that is fine. Let's also go ahead and grab some silver and some gold so that we can make some electrum. Again, we are going to automate this using a mixer and a blaze burner, but for now we can also go ahead and throw that directly into here, and that will start making some electrum for us that we can use to make our first batch here. And then as far as the titanium plates are concerned, we should already have some titanium in the system. We do indeed. We just need to throw that onto our depot underneath the mechanical press to make titanium plates. And once we have all of the items, it should just then be a case of putting all of those into a pressure chamber, and we should be good to go. Speaking of which, I have gone ahead and made 2 more 3x3x3 pressure chambers over here on this platform. The reason for that is that I want to have 1 for making transistors, 1 for making capacitors, and then finally 1 for making these empty PCBs. And so we're going to set all of those up for the full automation of these circuits, especially once we have the assembly platform up and running. For now though, let's take some electrum. Let's get that electrum onto here. That should make some electrum plates, and if I'm not mistaken, those electrum plates should then be able to go into the rolling mill to get us electrum wire. It does. And of course, as soon as we have whoops, I did not mean to crush the rotten flesh there. As soon as we have at least 6 electrum wire, we should be able to make our first batch of empty PCBs. So let's throw all 3 of these over into this pressure chamber. Again, for that, we are going to need something like a hopper, which as per usual is just a temporary setup because we're not going to use that long term. But for now, if we put in 6 of these and then 1 of these and 1 of these, that should be everything that we need to make our first empty PCBs. And then of course, we're doing a chest on the output as well. And there we go, 3 empty PCBs. Nice. So now you'll see here that it says etch success chance, 0%. What that means is that if we now put this into the etching tank, it has a 0% chance, not any chance at all, of becoming an actual finished PCB. It will 100% become a failed PCB. It will not become an unassembled PCB, which is what we want. We want the unassembled PCB because we can then craft that into a finished PCB, and we can use those finished PCBs to make the assembly platform items required and also progress on with the pack. What we have to do here is place the empty PCB into the UV light box. That's going to start using pressure, and it's going to start increasing the etch success chance slowly but surely. The etch success chance doesn't increase linearly here. It goes much faster at the start and then slows down a ton towards the end, so it's very easy to get it like up to 50%, but then trying to get it from 95 to 100% takes much, much longer. Thankfully, in this pack, as we've seen, we can go ahead and craft these speed upgrades very easily. I'm going to go ahead and ideally, again, get all 10 of those, although I guess we could potentially steal a few out of here for the time being, especially, as I keep mentioning, due to the fact that this is a very temporary system. Let's do this. That's going to make that much, much faster, but you'll still see that it is slowing down as we get closer to 100. Of course, at any point now, we could take these out. You don't have to wait until it gets to 100%. You could take it out at 50%, but it just means you have a 50-50 chance of actually getting an assembled PCB. Once it's ready though, we put it into the etching tank, and you'll see it then begins the etching process, and once it gets to 100%, it will either become assembled or failed. For us, it's definitely going to succeed because it has a 100% etch success chance because we have so many speed upgrades in here and because we have so much pressure. You'll see it does tear through the pressure quite fast, and so do want to be careful with that, but this should be good to go, and you can really put as many of these as you want into the system, and so long as you don't apply any heat to the etching tank, it doesn't actually use any etching acid. The Twitch chat has told me that you can apply heat to this, make it warmer. If you do that, it will work faster, but it will also burn through the etching acid, so you'll have to make more of it. Not that it's particularly hard to make, but for us, I think we're going to continue with this process, and if we want to set up the assembly platform, the assembly IO unit, both import and export, with the laser and the controller, so that we can make these more easily, we are going to need, I think, 1 of these finished PCBs per item. So I think we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 6, 7. Yeah, we need 3 for the assembly controller. So I'm fairly certain that we need 7 PCBs. Let me go ahead and bookmark these devices. Let me unbookmark the other items as well that we don't need here. We need 1 exporter, 1 importer, 1 platform. We need 1 laser, and we need 1 controller. That requires 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so we need 7 PCBs, which means we're going to have to do what we just did here 2 more times to get us 9 in total. Again, that should be fine. We've got enough circuit backplates. We've got enough titanium plates. We just need more electrum wire, which is going to be super easy to do. And so real quick, I'm going to get a bunch more of these empty PCBs. I'm going to run them through the UV light box, through the etching tank, and we'll come back and set up this right here. The benefit of this is that it cuts out the UV light box and the etching tank and allows us to go straight from the empty PCB to the unassembled PCB without having to go through the etching tank and the UV light box. All right, so not too long later, we now have almost 8 unassembled PCBs. You can use the time in a bottle here to make the etching tank much faster. I also made way more of these empty PCBs because it was fairly easy to do once we had enough of the electrum wire, and we do still have even more electrum wire ready to go here, so we can continue to make even more of these if we want. For now though, we do have these unassembled PCBs, and so we should be able to go ahead and craft these with our previously made electronic components to get 7 of these finished PCBs, which is hopefully going to make life a little easier for us. It looks like, for whatever reason, the etching tank has not been marked as completed. Let me quickly pick that up to get the quest complete. Perfect. We can then replace that down and re-get these back in there for the time being. That gives us more finished PCBs and lead coins, so it looks like actually we did only need 1 of them because we get given more once we've crafted it. And so now we should be able to make all of the items required here. We do need a lot of these pneumatic cylinders. These require a fair amount of plastic, but again, we've got a ton of plastic already set up and automated, so we can go and just take a few stacks of plastic out of here, drop those into our system, and we should be good to go. So we need 3, 6, 8, 11 of these pneumatic cylinders. Can we make 11 of these? We also need some of these cannon barrels. That requires some more of the reinforced brick. Thankfully, we did leave this stone cooking, and so we should be able to make a ton of the reinforced stone here, craft basically all of that into reinforced brick just as soon as my system lets me. Let's do this, and let's do this. We're not going to craft it all into wall. I don't think we're going to need quite that much. In fact, 42, I think, is already more than we're going to need. You do craft these in sets of 2, and so we need 6 of these in order to make 12 of these. Perfect. At which point, do we have what it takes to make the assembly controller? We do. We just need to leave and let our system reconfigure itself. Boom. Do we have what it takes to make the assembly platform? We do. Can we then also make the assembly laser? We cannot, because we need red glass. For that, we need a red dye. And for that, we might just have to bone meal some grass to try and find something red. Although, actually, can we buy beetroot? We can get beetroot seeds, and we do, in fact, already have beetroot seeds. And so I guess we could just harvest the beetroot that we already have, Isaac. That probably makes a lot more sense than what we were going to do. Boom, and boom. That gets us 8 red glass, which is more than enough for the assembly laser. And then now we just need the importer and exporter, which are both basically the same recipe here. You can just craft, I believe, one into the other. You can. So we can just craft a second importer, get rid of everything else. Ideally, again, if we have space, let's do this, and let's do this. Cool. At which point, we are good to go on the quest. We get even more finished PCBs for completing the quest, and from there, we should be able to actually set this up to do some work for us. Now, again, this does require pressure to work, and essentially the way this works is we place down the controller. I believe the controller here is what requires the pressure, so I'm going to place that down like right here, because I think it's going to be able to get pressure straight from this liquid compressor. Then we want to place down our assembly platform. We want to place down our laser, which I'm going to put here, and then we want to have our importer and our exporter. Let's put the importer down here and the exporter here. It doesn't matter necessarily where you put these, so long as the laser, the importer, and the exporter all have access to the platform in the middle, and so long as they're all connected in some way to the assembly controller. In here is where we put the laser program, like so. And essentially, the importer and exporter are able to interface with adjacent inventories. And so if we were to put a chest, let's say here and here, we should now be able to put things that we want to import into this chest and then put things that are finished into this chest. For example, if we wanted to take these empty PCBs and convert them into unassembled PCBs, we should just be able to put them in here. Chat is right that we should probably, if we want to be safe, put some of the safety modules into here. Like so. We are also going to put speed upgrades in here as well. We'll get to that in a second. But now, it should just be a case of putting an empty PCB in here, and we should see our system very slowly, but surely, grab that empty PCB, and then very, very slowly but surely place it onto this center platform. And then from there, it's going to very slowly etch it with the laser, and then very slowly move it over into the chest. Of course, we can make all of this much, much, much less slow if we make the speed upgrades. And of course, now we can kind of just go steal them from here. We can take down the UV light box. It's no longer necessary because we don't need that anymore. We have our assembly platform. Let's put all 10 of those into here, and that's going to start, hopefully, etching much, much faster. Again, as soon as we put the laser program in. There we go. It's going to work. It's doing its etching. And now we just have to put these empty PCBs into this chest, and they get converted into unassembled PCBs. And then, of course, from there, we can just craft them with the electronic components to make the finished PCBs. And that's that. We're good to go. And so now, all we need to do, I guess, is automate the creation of these items. So automate the creation of Electrum, automate the sending of titanium around into here, or should I say the making of titanium, and then the sending of titanium to be turned into titanium plates. And we also need to automate those circuit backplanes using either an induction smelter or an engineer's workbench. The engineer's workbench can be automated if you make the automated engineer's workbench. And I did get enough items to make 2 of these automated workbenches, because we need 1 for the electronic components. This has to be made in the engineer's workbench, so we do need at least 1 automated engineer's workbench. However, the other recipe here, that being the circuit backplane, this can be made in the engineer's workbench, but it can also be made in an induction smelter from thermal expansion. This wasn't really makeable up until now because of the fact that it requires a machine frame. And the machine frame here requires an integrated circuit. However, now that we have our first finished PCBs, we should be able to make our first packaged integrated circuits. This is made by just putting a finished PCB back into the input slot. So if I just put this back in here, like that, that should take out that finished PCB, etch that again, and we're going to get a cardboard box of some persuasion, which we can now take. And if we run this through either a multi-servo press or, I guess for us, a mechanical saw from Create, that's going to get us 24 of those integrated circuits, which is enough for us to make 24 of the thermal expansion machines. And so it's really not going to be that difficult for us to use the induction smelter instead of using the multi-block automated workbench, which I think is going to be just better for us in the long run. So let me go ahead and throw this down. Let's throw it down maybe like here for now. And let's do this. Probably not our best choice of placement, but that does work and does give us 24 integrated circuits. And so now I'm fairly certain that we can indeed make the machine frame from thermal expansion. We can. It's actually super easy, and we can make up to 24 of them because it's just iron and glass with those integrated circuits. And then in terms of actually making an induction smelter here, we would just need a blast furnace, some invar gears. The redstone flux coil is makeable. We need the crafting components blueprint, which we do already have with redstone and a gold rod. Once we have the induction smelter, this again becomes easier. We can just make it in there. Do we have any invar lying around? We totally do. Nice. So we should be able to craft up 2 invar gears, put those in the system. Do we have enough gold to make some gold rods? We totally do. We'll throw those in there. We'll take the electrum wire out. That should make gold rods for us. And then we just take our pre-existing redstone and then over in our engineer's workbench, boom, and boom, we can make nothing? Okay, so unfortunately, the gold rod that we get from the rolling mill here doesn't work. This one, you would think that both of them would work, but for whatever reason, this one doesn't work. We do have to make the gold rod from the Enigmatica mod here by crafting 2 gold together. The gold rod that we got out of the rolling mill was not this one. It was a different gold rod. I think that's probably a mistake, but either way, that gets us this redstone flux coil. And now back over here, we should be able to go ahead and make ourselves the induction smelter just as soon as we get one more blast furnace, and boom. Nice. So this does require power, but of course it's much, much smaller than all of the other machines that we've been putting down up until now. And so temporarily, if we did something like this and like this is obviously not its final resting place, but if we do that, we should now be able to use this to craft all kinds of stuff, right? We should be able to use it to make more of these redstone flux coils. The first thing I want to try is, can I use these gold rods here? I totally can. So they do work in this recipe. They just don't work in the engineer's workbench for whatever reason. That's fine. We're going to get a bunch of these and dump those in the system because basically all of the machines from thermal expansion do require some of these redstone flux coils. They're also used for some augments as well that we're going to want to make later on down the line. But now going forward, we can use the induction smelter here for the making of the circuit backplane, which I think is going to be easier than having the multi-block engineer's workbench. Speaking of multi-blocks, let me quickly go ahead and tear down this mixer here, because again, this is really no longer needed. And in its place, and by in its place, I mean not here, but elsewhere, we're going to go ahead and build our first auto engineer's workbench so that we can begin to automate the production of these electronic components. Okay, so I've gone ahead and moved the arc furnace over by a few blocks here. Not only does that make it a little easier to access our chests on this pressure chamber, but it also gives us space at the back here for yet another multi-block structure. We've torn down the mixer, and now we have the automated workbench, again, just using the book here. We've got all of the items down, and the conveyor belts here do have to go down in a specific order, and once they're all down, we just right-click on the slab. Nice, and in doing that, we do complete the 3rd chapter of the quest book. All of this is now good to go, and we can begin to use this to automate some crafts. So we do, of course, need to provide power to this using our logic cables here. Let's do this and, of course, this, and then we'll just run that down like we've been doing before, around this way, like that. And here, I believe that we do need to put the blueprint in that we're going to use to craft the recipe. So it's not the metal press one, it's the crafting components one that we need. Over here, the crafting components are currently in use, but we can take this out because, of course, it's the electric component that's going to get made over here. And so we just need to place that into the workbench, and now it should be able to produce this. And we can select it to make sure it does produce that. And I think from there, I'm pretty sure it's going to produce items and then send them along the conveyor belts. And so I think we want the output draw to be right about here, like that. And so we can kind of give this a test, assuming we have enough transistors and capacitors, which we do. So if we take some transistors and some capacitors, we probably don't need quite this many. In fact, let's do 16 of each. We then need some of the compressed mechanisms, which of course we also have. And then finally, we also need copper wire, which I'm pretty sure we also have available. We do. Cool. Let me take those out. Let's also go ahead and sell our gold coins here real quick. How much are these worth? We've got 16.28 million. Each one of these is worth 262,000 actually. So we do get a couple million there from those gold coins. Quite nice. Also, look at that, new daily offers available on the Amazon tablet. So there are now different options available at the bottom here if we wanted to buy a balloon or a sword with Leech 1 for whatever reason. And also, in other news, we do need to upgrade our storage setup here because we're actually out of space. Like, these chests are now fully full up on space. I think what we should be able to do is just craft some of these diamond to netherite upgrades, and that should allow us to just go ahead and upgrade our pre-existing chests, you guessed it, from diamond to netherite, which should then allow us to store even more stuff. So if I were to do this, that's going to make it just that little bit bigger. In fact, we'll get a scroll bar down here, which is quite something. We are going to need even more netherite scrap if we want to be able to process even more of this. But again, thankfully, we can just buy it. It is a little expensive, but I'll spend $250,000 on buying a full stack. We'll whack that in there, and that should hopefully be more than enough netherite scrap for us to make the final 2 chest upgrades. Back over here, let's see if we can't make this work. So I don't know if I can put items directly in. It looks like I can. That's good. If I want to be able to make this then, each one of these requires 2 copper wire and then 1 of everything else. So if we put in 32 copper wire with 16 compressed mechanisms, 16 transistors, and 16 capacitors, that should start using those, and I believe it should just run it across the conveyor belt and then output it to the storage door. Let me quickly, of course, run this down, get this hooked up to power, and see if this does indeed work. It does. Look at that. It's doing some crafting, doing some thinking at least, and then kaplunk, it does it. Nice. Okay, cool. This is good. And so I'm fairly certain that although there's like a conveyor belt here, I don't think this machine works like the metal press does. You don't put the items onto the conveyor belt. I'm pretty sure that here we can just pump the items into one of these 2 input slots, and we can kind of specify how many items we want to go in to make sure we never have too many in there. And then we can pump those items around, and we can use our drawer here to store these electronic components. Again, we'll probably end up putting a downgrade in here to make sure we never have too many. We could even do some more integrated dynamics logic like we did with our initial pressure chamber to make sure that we stop sending items to the input slot once this gets up to 64. That would work quite nicely. And so now it's just a case of auto-crafting the components of the electronic component. Thankfully, the compressed mechanism's already done. The copper wire is fairly easy for us to automate, and then the capacitor and transistor can be automated using the new pressure chambers we have and kind of using the same methodology that we're using over here for our pre-existing pressure chambers. I did just notice that my netherite jetpack is out of juice, so real quick, let's see how fast this is at charging this up compared to what I have downstairs. It is so much faster. Nice. And the last thing I'd like to do today before we wrap up is I would like to get ideally 1 more module into our environmental controller, and that is the flight module, because this actually looks fairly easy for us to craft. All we need is 6 gas tiers plus a syringe with a gas in it, and I think that's going to be fairly easy for us to do, especially given that the gold sword here has looting 2 by default, so we only have to kill a few ghasts to get 6 gas tiers, and the nether should be kind of full of gas, so at least with the jetpack, it should be fairly easy for us to find a bunch of ghasts. We are, of course, going to have to make even more dimensional shards. We need 8 in order to make another infused ender pearl, but we did get a bunch of excess ender pearls, so we have at least 1 left here, which is good. And then in terms of the module plus, we do need even more ender pearls, actually, so we are going to have to head back through to the nether. Speaking of which, people have pointed out that we could potentially look at making some waystones. These would make traveling back and forth between the area of the end that has the enderman and our base a fair bit faster. Basically, you put these down, and you can then right-click them, give them a name, and then whenever you right-click on one waystone, it will show you all of the other waystones that you have available in the world, and you can just teleport between them for a small amount of experience. To make 2 of these would require 8 ender pearls and some amethyst shards, and to be fair, right now we actually don't have any amethyst shards. We were given some budding amethyst at the start of the series. I believe we could put that down and accelerate it with the time in a bottle in order to get some amethyst, but at the same time as well, I think what we could also do in the not so distant future is just look up setting up a regular mob farm here in the overworld using the dreadful dirt, which is the antithesis of the delightful dirt that we put down previously. And so instead of spawning passive mobs, it would spawn hostile mobs, and it would be fairly easy, I think, for us to set up a mob farm that just produces ender pearls passively, which I think would be ideal. And so I think for now we can probably skip out on the waystones. I think instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to head out, I'm going to try and find some ghasts. I'm going to obviously hit the ghasts with the syringe to fill up this syringe. I'm going to try and kill a couple of ghasts to get at least 6 ghast tiers. We'll also go kill some more endermen as well to try and get the 5 ender pearls, I believe, that we're going to need to make the infused ender pearl along with the module plus template here. And of course, we'll also go ahead and make a ton more, at least a stack more of these dimensional shards to allow us to actually make this flight module. But once we have that flight module, we can kind of do away with the jetpack because we will just have creative mode flight in the range of our environmental controller. Alright, so not too long later, we did build a bit of a platform here out in the nether, and as you can see, the ghasts are spawning quite quickly now, which is good for us here. And thankfully, with our looting 2 sword, we actually didn't need to kill that many guests to get the guest tiers. And so now we can go back home, and it should just be a case of getting enough dimensional shards to make this happen. Also, it turns out you can find dimensional shard ore here in the Nether, and especially using the Fortune 2 on the gold pickaxe, you actually get quite a lot of dimensional shards from each dimensional shard ore. Alright, so the dimensional shard ore in the Nether is definitely the way to go. I did go to get glowstone and nether quartz to make more dimensional shard ore. I even started cooking up some more prismarine down on our bottom platform there, but turns out we don't need it. We got 2 stacks of dimensional shard ore for like 2 minutes of work over in the Nether. And so now we should be able to craft an infused pearl. We should then be able to craft a few more of these infused pearls. We need another 4 of them, along with, of course, 4 of these infused diamonds. And once we have those, that should be, I think, basically everything we need, apart from 1 more infused diamond. So can I make a module? I can. Can I make the module plus template? I can. And can I make this? I believe we can. Again, I think we're going to have to put this in manually because I don't think it's going to like the syringe here. But if we put in our 6 gas tiers along with that infused pearl, we get ourselves the flight module. And now we can go and whack that into our environmental controller. This is going to increase its power usage. Of course, this does use 0.004 RF per tick, so it is going to use more power than it did previously, but we should get flight. So if I take this off, can I fly? I totally can. Look at this. We have creative flight, and so long as we are within the range of the environmental controller, so as long as we're between Y levels 59 and 70, and so long as we're within 30 blocks of the environmental controller, we are going to be good to go. And again, because we've made such a small range, like we've set the Y levels quite tightly between 59 and 70, and we've set the radius quite low, the power usage is not extraordinarily high, which is good. And so now we can fly around freely. We can keep the jetpack on, and I'll just turn it off for now. That way, if needs be, we can always turn it back on in the future, because it does also have the same armor benefits as a netherite chestplate, so there's no point in taking it off really, just in case we do run out of juice in the environmental controller, or just in case we want to go through to the nether and we still want to be able to fly. But we now have creative flight, at least for whilst we're in our base here in the overworld, which again is just going to make it that little bit easier for us to get around and tweak things in our ever-growing factory. And so next time we'll come back. Also, we get more machine frames here, and we get more of these integrated circuits, which is very nice indeed. But next time we'll come back, and we will probably start looking at a few bits of automation. I think right at the start of the next stream, we'll probably look at setting up the automation for the capacitors, the transistors, and the electrical components, and then also look at potentially automating the PCBs as well. We could then also look potentially at swapping our seller. Right now we're selling these compressed mechanisms. We could do what we did previously when we stopped selling basic mechanisms. We could stop selling compressed mechanisms and start looking at selling these finished PCBs once those are automated. And I think also we'll probably look in the next episode at starting to work on applied energistics 2. Once we get the inscriber, we can start working towards the controller, and that is of course going to allow us to kind of move away from using the storage terminals here from integrated dynamics, which is hopefully going to make our crafting much easier, because we are still having kind of ongoing issues with the system not letting us put items in, despite the fact that we have space in our chests. And of course we get all the other benefits of AE2 as well. We get digital storage with disks, and we get access to AE2's superb auto crafting as well, and so that is definitely going to be worth the investment for us. And then we can of course continue to push through into the later quests in the quest book, of course trying to get all the way to that sentient mainframe at the end. But that is of course a problem for future Isaac. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Forever Factory there.